Good morning, everyone. My name is Caitlin Molina, and I'm the Deputy Commissioner for the Department of Early Education and Care. I'm joined by a number of my colleagues at EEC to support you in your questions and concerns related to the new teacher qualifications policy. I want to thank you all for joining us this morning. We've really had a lot of great input from the field today on the new minimum hiring requirements for educators across the Commonwealth and childcare programs. We are so grateful for your feedback and your input as we work to solve and support implementation of the revised policy. Again, my name is Caitlin Molina. I'm Deputy Commissioner for Childcare Operations for the Department of Early Education and Care in Massachusetts. It's my honor to support you all in reviewing and understanding the questions pertaining to the minimum hiring requirements for educators policy in Massachusetts. I have several of my esteemed colleagues, both from the policy unit and from the teacher qualifications unit, on the call to support and review your questions. We've received many of them in advance of the office hours, and so I want to thank you to the field for providing those opportunities for us to make revisions prior to today, and we look forward to continue receiving your feedback and supporting you all in responding to questions and concerns. I'm going to go ahead and open up our PowerPoint. Just to give some overall framing and structure to the office hours, and then we will begin reviewing the chat and looking at the questions both already received and the ones that we have continually received through the duration of this webinar. All right, as a reminder, we are here with the Teacher Qualifications Unit, my esteemed colleagues, and right now we are reviewing the minimum hiring requirements for educators policy. Our agenda for this morning is to do a welcome and introductions. Again, my name is Caitlin Molina. I'm joined by Joy Cohen from the Policy Department and our colleagues at the Teacher Qualifications Unit. I'm going to review the key objectives, the minimum hiring requirements for educators policy at a very high level. I'm going to support and think through the additional feedback that we received since launching the revised policy and provide you all with some updates on revisions that the agency has already made in response to your feedback and constructive criticism. We will then solicit additional ideas and opportunities for strengthening our policy to improve the clarity and the intent. And in our appendix of the slides, which I will not preview for you today, but will be available on our engagement portal website, is some detail on the professional registry and the work that we have scoped for the future to provide better support and meaningful interactions for professionals across the early education and care setting to advance their professional development and advance coursework and work experience opportunities. So our key objective hours this morning for office hours is again to support our educators and program leaders in understanding and applying the minimum hiring requirements for educators policy. We would like to collect frequently asked questions from educators and program leaders on the minimum hiring requirements for educators policy and provide guidance and high-level framing for EEC's vision and intent for supporting the workforce in achieving these minimum qualification standards. We would like to identify opportunities for future clarification and explanation in the minimum hiring requirements to support our educators and our programs in fully understanding and implementing the policy and the operational impacts of that. We will offer technical assistance on more complex hiring decisions, such as those that require out-of-country education experience and review. So our educators policy at a very high level, and I want to just reiterate the intent and the goal of this policy. It was to provide flexibility to programs and educators to be able to confirm qualifications at the site level. We worked hard to broaden the definitions for qualifying educator preparation and for updating criteria to demonstrate their competency across these various mechanisms for verification. The regulation previously has since been replaced by this policy. So the educator qualifications that we are asking programs to adhere to are represented in the policy that was shared by EEC on Friday. And then a revised version was sent just this past Monday that reflects feedback and input from the field. I want to start by acknowledging that changes in policy and operational procedure are difficult. They're difficult for state government, they're difficult for programs, and they're difficult for educators, and they're difficult for the children and families that we serve. We felt strongly that these changes were needed based on direct response that we heard both from the field, from our licensors, and from our families. We heard that there were staffing challenges in our early education and care programs, and we recognized that we needed to think differently about how to support programs and rapidly hiring qualified educators to support teaching and learning. Our operational changes within the program or within the policy are we have stopped requesting or requiring programs to send their teacher qualification certificate applications to EEC. Previously, programs would review those applications and educators and programs would submit them to our TQ unit. TQ unit will no longer, as of Monday, accept, review, and approve teacher certification applications. The only exceptions to those will be one, out-of-country work experience. So while you are asked to verify the hire on site as a program, the TQ unit recognizes that there are a lot of complexities with reviewing out-of-country or international work experience and coursework experience. We encourage programs to reach out directly for technical assistance if they are struggling with the review and approval of those qualifications. We are asking program leaders to validate the teacher qualifications at the program level. I want to reiterate that even though we have stopped accepting applications and TQ certification applications, the TQ unit is committed to reviewing and approving all of the already received applications. So if your educators or if your programs have already submitted applications prior to December 6th to the TQ unit EEC, we will honor receipt of those applications and will issue certificates for completed and accepted applications. If programs and educators have submitted incomplete applications for teacher qualification certification, we will be notifying them of what is missing from the application and will give them the opportunity to resubmit, or alternatively, they can retract their application and work directly with their program administrator to meet the minimum hiring requirements. As programs work to develop protocols and procedures to define their minimum hiring requirements in accordance to this policy, we are reiterating the requirement and the expectation that they maintain this documentation, program leaders, at the site level so that our licensors can support you in understanding and implementing this revised policy. As previously required of programs who support staff, all staff are required to have a file on site at their program, which would include the documentation used to verify their qualifications. As a reiteration, this policy is forward-facing. So for those that have already received teacher qualification certificates, we will honor the certificate as the documentation. Moving forward, the documentation should consist of both work experience and the coursework completion, whether it be CEUs, PDPs, or other alternative equivalencies. Some of the qualification changes that were made was really an attempt to broaden what programs can determine as requirements. So accepting DESE licenses, accepting provisional acceptance of unofficial transcripts due to college backlogs, and we really increased the range of content and titles that we accept for coursework. The intent and what was our priority was to be less restrictive and more responsive for ways to educate educators to engage in preparation and coursework. So we recognize that the first version of this policy was not consistently received as least restrictive. And so since then, the agency has made modifications to the policy to really be clear on our intent and our focus, which was first and foremost to support educators and to support programs with more flexible criteria for achieving the minimum hiring requirements. With that flexibility, we also revisited our definition for work experience and provided some additional opportunities to think differently about what might qualify a candidate as having work experience. So specifically, we heard that while a candidate may not have had direct teaching experience in a classroom, they have a plethora of experience working with children and families. And so programs had really requested to us that they be able to have some autonomy in reviewing and determining what valuable work experience might look like. Again, I just want to reiterate that as with any policy, I think what was most important for this agency is to receive feedback directly from our experts, the field, and be able to respond timely to those flags or escalations relating to what components of the policy may have been misunderstood, what may have not been clear, or what may have felt more restrictive and not more flexible. And so since then, the agency has made a number of changes to the policy to provide more clarity on what is required and how we can support you all in identifying that documentation to verify your qualifications on site. We are committed to resolving components of the policy that may have had unintended consequences for the field. We've done that once, and we're committed to revisiting that if we have other comments or feedback that raise to a concern level of needing to revise. These office hours will continue to serve as an opportunity to solicit additional feedback from the field and manage our agency's appropriate and timely response to resolution. I want to reiterate the intent for releasing these minimum hiring requirements because I think it's important that folks have an understanding of where EEC was coming from. Over the course of the past year, we've heard so much feedback from programs about their challenges in hiring educators, and it was really important that we took this feedback and supported with a call to action. This policy was intended to be that call to action to allow you the flexibility to hire staff based on the minimum hiring requirements outlined. The intent was to eliminate the TQ verification process for new candidates. So this would not apply to your existing hires, but for new candidates or programs that were looking to recruit. We did not want the TQ operational process to be a barrier for you hiring. So we had acknowledged that there was a backlog in reviewing and accepting and certifying teacher qualifications. That process was no longer serving our field. And so while our staff have incredible expertise and ability to provide technical assistance on minimum hiring requirements, we understood that the paper process was becoming excessively burdensome for the field. We wanted to provide increased flexibility for center-based programs to confirm qualifications at the site level and recruit candidates more quickly by allowing some coursework to be developed after hire. We wanted to broaden the types of EEC permitted educator preparation programs and certificates to allow recruitment of candidates from a broader set of backgrounds. Persistently, what we have heard from and feedback from both the field, from our licensors, and from families is that programs wanted to have more autonomy and more independence in reviewing and approving hires at their program. So these parameters, as defined in the minimum hiring requirements, allow programs to use a policy to then independently review and approve hires for their site. We also intended to update the criteria for prior work experience to allow for any activity where a candidate may have demonstrated competency for the role they are being recruited to serve in. On Friday, an initial version of the policy was released. As I stated before, we received a lot of great constructive feedback and concern from both our field, our advocates, and our programs. As a result, within 24 hours, the agency produced a new version of the policy that reflected your feedback. And I want to just take a victory lap to say thank you so much for constructively raising where we may have missed the mark. We are really incredibly grateful for the partnership that we have with our field and that we can depend on our experts in the field to provide us with follow-up and support when we may have designed a policy that had unintended consequences or did not achieve the intent we were aiming for with its release. First change was that EEC amended the policy to clarify that these teachers must be 21 years or older or have a high school diploma or equivalent. The second clarification that we made in that policy under age requirements was that we amended the policy to clarify that teacher assistants who are 16 years or older are not required to complete a vocational program. So that was one misunderstanding. I do also want to reiterate that the Chapter 74 applications, as currently defined in statute and regulation, will continue. So we will continue to accept Chapter 74 applications as we currently do. That will be the only type of teacher qualification certification that EEC processes moving forward. There was a clarification made to the director group leader requirements. EEC will amend the policy to clarify previous qualification requirements for these roles are still accepted. So a lot of the miscommunication and the challenge with the representation of the tables in the policy were that we did not also add the existing requirements that were in our regulations. Those are still in effect. And so what the table represents within each of those rows are options. They're not all inclusive, but they're to provide an example for programs so that they could see what level or what combination of work experience and coursework they could consider and approve as part of their on-site certification process. We also wanted to clarify our intent with the credit-bearing requirements for educators post-hire. It's an expectation that they complete those within 6 months, but they can consist of a variety of credit-bearing requirements. So they could be college credits, they could be CEUs, and they could be PDPs. So we really broadened our definition of what equivalency means, and we've removed specific categories of study within those requirements for the coursework. So whereas previously we had defined recommended categories of study, we heard from the field that this was actually more restrictive to recommend those categories of study than what had initially been developed under policy. That has since been resolved. So I am going to stop sharing and kind of review some of the questions that we've received to date and provide some direct feedback. As you all have been developing and sending in questions in the chat, I just want to reiterate a few things that were misunderstood but should be helpful to you in navigating. First and foremost, I just want to reiterate the TQ team is no longer accepting applications and will no longer be certifying educator qualifications. This is a short-term interim step as we prepare more robustly for a professional registry and a credential that EEC has been working to design. So there will be verification and work from EEC to support educator qualifications through technical assistance during this interim period. And then in the future state with the new professional registry, we will begin to revisit those and support work directly in the new registry. We've received a lot of inquiries specific to already received applications. I would really love to reiterate to all that we do have a number of submitted applications that we are continuing to work through. Those applications that are completed and submitted will be reviewed and approved and certified by the agency. For those that are incomplete, we will give programs the option to either submit a revised and completed application, or alternatively, they can work directly with their program leader or site coordinator to make sure that they meet the minimum hiring requirements. I'm going to go to the Q&A. Just as a reminder that while we have a chat function on Zoom, we're using the Q&A functionality so that we can actually track the questions that we're receiving. Some are duplicates, but please don't apologize. We're trying to get all of your questions answered. But when you submit them through the question and answer, it allows us to have documentation of the questions so that we can either respond live. I have team and colleague members who are responding via in the chat or in the Q&A portion. And then we are also working to develop an FAQ document that will support. Just want to reiterate that the updated version of the policy was released on Monday. So people are asking when that will be released. It was already released on Monday, December 6th. It is available on our website. So the website has both the revised application packet, which I just want to reiterate, programs are not required to use the application packet. We updated the work experience forms and some of the other documentation in that packet so that you all could use it as a resource, but it is certainly not a requirement. It is a resource that you all can use, the work experience forms. I've heard from a lot of programs, they would prefer to use letters of recommendation or other mechanisms to validate work experience. That is your decision as a program. I just wanted to reiterate that the updated policy, the packet itself, and the Chapter 74 application, which has not been modified, is up on the website, as well as a protocols document, which outlines some of the expectations that we have of programs and how our licensors will be supporting programs during on-site monitoring visits to understand the policy. Let me see, I answered that one. So while the program as a best practice may require, outside of the minimum hiring requirements, specific infant toddler coursework, we are not differentiating that type of role for an assistant teacher. So while it would be best practice and recommended that they have specific infant toddler experience and coursework experience, assistant teachers, there are flexibility within the minimum hiring requirements for them to achieve those qualifications. You are correct in that the TQ unit is no longer accepting applications. For staff who would like to get certified, they should work directly with their program to have the program approve their minimum hiring requirements. So I know that this is a shift, but the TQ team will no longer be approving and reviewing teacher qualifications. That secondary review from the agency is no longer happening, and so that will shift to the expectation and the responsibility of the program administrator. I'm seeing some questions related to enforcement, so I can cover that for you now. So licensors will be providing support and technical assistance. As you all know, during routine monitoring visits, it is an expectation that programs have staff files available for the licensor to review. It will and always will be an expectation and a requirement that programs have within the staff file that they can share BRC suitability of their, that's a requirement, BRC suitability of the candidate, first aid CPR certification, and early ed essentials completion, and their staff orientation completion as well. For those of you who will begin the minimum hiring requirements, there is an expectation that there be documentation that substantiates the hire, both with work experience and coursework experience. Within the protocols document and the policy itself, it gives examples of what type of documentation can be used to file and verify the qualifications of the candidate. Just want to reiterate, there's no expectation from EEC that you are verifying the documents outside of accepting them. So we are not advising or recommending that you contact colleges or institutes of higher education to verify the transcripts. You can accept the transcripts as is. Same with some of the work experience forms, unless you are calling references and doing so as part of your operating procedures within your agency or your program. We are not requiring you to validate the work experience forms. That is a personal program, an employer decision. I think people are still asking about why this is happening. And I think this was in direct response to both the field licensors, everyone. We were hearing that the current process was not working. So our qualification standards were too stringent. And then the operational process of the paper application was creating a lot of backlogs and was preventing programs from being able to hire candidates quickly. So this was really an effort to streamline this work and to provide you with more immediate and timely response and support to prepare operationally for your program. So the certification will remain in the system, and we are working right now through the design of the professional registry so that we can ensure the materials and the pieces that are most important to the future design of the credential are preserved and maintained so people are not having to submit documentation twice. Given that we are still in the design phase of the credential, we have not yet determined what documentation or what piece of information that is currently in the TQ system or the PQR, what will need to be migrated to the new system. That is something that is top of mind and something that we are really working through as we move through the system. The care.com course, I'm glad folks are asking about this because we do get a lot of questions on this. The care.com course is still accepted for child growth and development. It is the only course that we are accepting for that does not exceed the CEU limit. So I know a lot of folks have asked, it's not the 4.5 CEUs. Can we still use that as the child growth and development course? Yes, you can. Educators will not get a qualification certificate from EEC as they traditionally have. That does not mean, so Chapter 74 applications will still receive a teacher qualification certificate. All other new hires will be managed on-site by the program. And so those who have already submitted applications, we've made that commitment to review and approve those applications. For those that may have joined late, we have revised the incomplete letters. So if you have an educator who has submitted a packet prior to December 6th, but it was flagged as incomplete, they will have the option of either resubmitting with a complete packet, or alternatively, they can retract the application and work directly with their program leader to meet the minimum hiring requirements. I'm seeing a lot of comments about capacity and ratios and group sizes. And so I feel the need to just reiterate that the group size ratio and license capacity regulations have not changed as a result of this policy. Only the educator qualifications have shifted. And so it is still the expectation and the requirement of programs to adhere to the license capacity on your license. If you're interested in increasing your capacity because you've been able to build more staffing to support your children and families, you can submit that request to your licensor so that they can review and accommodate your request for an increased capacity. I am going to confirm that first aid CPR certification and completion is still required. There have been changes made to the qualifications for assistant teacher, lead, and director. That said, you can still use what was previously accepted as qualifications as a foundation. Each row of the table in the policy offers you an option as to as to various options to meet those qualifications. You do not need so I'm seeing a lot of like course specific questions, and I just want to reiterate that while we've identified some categories of study as bumper rails or parameters to support you all in identifying relevant coursework, you all do have the ability and the autonomy to define what is relevant coursework for your program. And so there are some parameters for categories of study, but you should look intimately within the chart just to make sure that you understand each of those and to think about the alternatives that you might consider as a program leader for hire. I saw that Alicia Wells has joined us, and so I wanted to give her an opportunity to talk through any sort of high-level questions that the TQ unit specifically has been getting and where there might need to be some clarifications. Alicia, I was able to clarify the care.com course requirements. I also spoke specifically to some of the operational challenges and the Chapter 74 applications. Mentioned that upgrades are no longer relevant, that they'll be working directly on site with programs. And then kind of tried to explain the revised chart and how the existing qualifications are still in effect as a standard, but we've added additional options to provide more flexibility. Do you have anything that you'd like to flag or add, given all the frequently asked questions we've been receiving?
I think you covered the mainly the basic ones that have been coming in more frequently. I know some of the colleges have concerns about students who are graduating and looking to be hired at a program, how that process would work. Just reiterating that the qualification aspect will happen at the programs upon hire. I know students that graduate are looking for a certificate to go to a program, especially for an interview process, but to reiterate that the process will happen at the program level. So I know I've gotten a few emails from a few colleges, especially the community colleges, surrounding the new qualification, the revised qualifications. Let's see, what else do we have?
I see a question about work experience. So we did update the work experience forms as a tool for you to use in verifying work experience, but it's certainly not a requirement. So one of the questions is, does the work experience doc need to be signed by a prior employee? That is a decision that you will make as a program. Some programs I've heard have chosen to accept letters of recommendation in lieu of a work experience form. So that is something that you can make a decision as a program and what makes you feel comfortable in accepting and reviewing to determine minimum qualification standards. What about past applicants who have misplaced their certificate? Where can we get that?
Sure. You can definitely email the TQ unit at our general email inbox at eecprofdev@mass.gov. Please include your full name, your date of birth, and the last four of your social security number. And the TQ unit can certainly give you a copy of your certificate if you've been certified in the past. And Kayla, I'm not sure if you've addressed those that are still in process as far as the backlog as well.
I did. I just, to reiterate, because I think people are trickling into office hours as they have time available during their day with the programs. I know everyone's so busy. We will continue to honor and accept those applications already submitted prior to December 6th. So that is our commitment. We've updated the incomplete letter. So for folks who have submitted incomplete applications, they'll be given the option to resubmit with the completed documentation, or they can retract and work directly with their program leader to meet the minimum hiring qualifications. Oh, great reminder. Someone asked me about the staff records checklist. So we have updated the staff records checklist. You'll note that there's some very broad language that just documents verification of meeting the minimum hiring requirements. That's because you all will define specifically the components or the documents that you're using to meet those qualification standards. Programs will be monitored as they currently are on their staff files. However, licensors will really be taking an approach of protecting time during their monitoring visit to allow you the opportunity to ask questions and to support your understanding of the implementation of the policy. So really want to talk about, just as we phase in this new process, all of our teams are working to be responsive and supportive as you understand the policy. And if there are specific questions around what type of documentation you should be accepting to verify those qualifications, I would again direct you to the document verification chart that's in both the protocols document and the policy itself, because it very clearly lays out options for what type of documentation you should accept or may accept as a program leader.
There's a question about where to find the work experience form. It is found on the minimum hiring requirements policy for educators updated website. EEC has updated their website to include all of the documentation and information that is being explained here today. We can include it in the chat, the link to the website. The website also includes these policies in Spanish, Portuguese, and Chinese. We do have the educator qualifications packet, the staff records checklist. And Caitlin did mention information on how to identify if courses will meet our qualifications. We do have the categories of studies content guide that breaks down the different objectives for those courses in those categories of studies. So that's a great tool to utilize. We also include information about CDA. So I'll include that link in the chat for everyone.
Just to reiterate, the care.com course, sorry, can you tell I've been talking about care.com a lot? The care.com course is extremely popular. And just to reiterate, yes, the Early Childhood Growth and Development Birth to 8 course is accepted for the child growth and development requirement within the policy. Not all care.com courses meet this requirement. So that specific title is the one that is accepted towards child growth and development.
There's a question about, can a program certify a lead teacher? Yes, you can qualify upgrades within your programs.
I'm seeing some questions about the accountability being shifted from a central governing body. I just want to reiterate that this is an interim strategy. So while While EEC is really providing technical assistance during this interim phase, it is our commitment to building a credential that reflects competency, both from work experience and coursework completion. And there will be EEC validation involved in that future state once the credential is built, designed, and launched in the new professional registry. I keep seeing questions about what if certificates are lost. Again, you should reach out to the Teacher Qualifications Unit with a request for a certificate.
I'll throw the email in the chat just so you can have it for future reference.
I'm seeing a lot about transferability of the qualifications. And so since you as a program are defining your hiring requirements, you may choose to adopt EEC's policy as a whole. You may choose to institute standards above what we've outlined in our minimum hiring standards. Just like other industries, there won't be a teacher qualification certificate that you can just accept. So you can either accept the teacher qualification certificate that was issued previously, or you can work to define what is the documentation or what are the elements you're requiring as a program to make this new hire. And so a letter of recommendation may be worthwhile because you can look at past experience with other programs. But you are correct in that since we have stopped issuing teacher qualification certificates, that will no longer be your single piece of paper to define hiring. We would imagine that programs may differ in opinion. That's why we've set the minimum parameters and our minimums hiring standards. There may be some programs. So I just really want to just reiterate that programs may differ in opinion, but what is most important is our adherence to the minimum hiring standards. And programs were always able to implement standards above what was outlined in EEC regulation.
There is a question about EEC's expectation for education obtained outside of the US. If it's needed to be submitted to EEC, where should they send the documentation? Again, programs can qualify educators who do obtain their education outside of the country. We do provide some information on what documentation is required. As you know, when you do have a degree or transcript from outside of the US, it has to be credentialed by an education organization that's a third party. It's not EEC, and usually that's sent to EEC for review. However, the TQ unit will be on staff to support programs and reviewing this documentation if they do have questions. So the TQ unit will be providing TA if you have questions related to coursework and education obtained outside of the US.
Grants and scholarships will continue to be offered. We are still supporting and adequately reinforcing an importance of advanced coursework, and so I appreciate the question. So I'm hearing some comments about what if we believe a candidate is qualified, but then our licensor does not agree. So the licensor will really be looking for BRC suitability, first aid CPR certification, and early ed essentials completion. In addition to that, they will be looking to make sure that you've been adhering to the minimum qualifications policy. You define what those standards are for your program in accordance with the policy, as long as you have a documentation that justifies the work experience and the coursework experience. We are really not looking to question your adoption of the policy. We just want to make sure that it is accurately implemented to support the intent, which is to hire qualified early educators into classrooms. Yes, the program director can make a decision or determination around whether a lead teacher can then become a director. So yes, they can work directly with their staff. And yes, if we do make any additional updates, we will share an updated version directly with the field. At this time, we don't have a revised version planned, but that is the intent of these office hours, is to collect additional feedback to determine whether additional clarification or edits are needed.
There's a question related if an educator is hired and therefore prove the minimum standard. If the educator changes program, is there some documentation that the educator can bring along showing that they meet the minimum standards? So within the document, the minimum hiring requirement policies on pages 21 and 22, there are the verification materials. The educators should have their original copies of their verification materials, leaving a copy at the programs. That way, if they do shift from program to program, they're able to bring that documentation to another program to be qualified.
Just want to reiterate that already hired and qualified staff as determined or deemed by EEC's TQ unit, there is not an additional expectation for them to achieve qualifications as a result of this policy. Their teacher certificate is still applicable and will still be honored. Just to clarify on the first aid certification and completion, that is defined in regulation. It is not a specific requirement within our educator qualifications policy. That's not why it's not listed as part of the required within 6 months. So you should refer to the regulations around having a certain percentage of staff who are certified or approved as first aid CPR certified. For those that are asking for some support and talking points for teachers or prospective candidates who are currently enrolled in coursework, it is always our expectation and our directive that we want to encourage as much active professional development as we possibly can among our workforce. It will only make us stronger and better to continue that level of learning, whether it be through work experience or coursework. And so while it may not be immediately secondarily validated by EEC, it certainly is validated by the program administrator or the leader, and will also likely be represented in a future credential design that we build.
There's a question related to out-of-school time programs as regarding the qualification types. Site coordinators, group leaders, and program administrators are for out-of-school time programs.
You are not required to put all of this into PQR. You should still have a PQR profile, but you are not required to put the information into PQR. If a new hire goes to a new program, does the new program have to repeat the qualification process? Yes, because you may have different hiring requirements that are set forward by your program. But as long as you are adhering to the minimum hiring requirements, it may just be a requirement to ask the candidate upon hire, instead of submitting their teacher qualification certificate, they will be submitting documentation verifying their work experience and their coursework. You may use the work verification form from the TQ application, but you could also accept a letter of recommendation or other document verification of work experience. How long does EEC expect this to last? So this has been requested from the field for a number of months. So as we are working to launch the professional registry, hoping for that to go live in January after the holidays, we will then over time work to build the credential. So we would expect this to be an interim but not long-term strategy, probably within the next 6 months to a year, to provide EEC with the time to support educators in understanding and building out the new credential. I see some questions around informal work experience, and yes, you as the program can define what you would accept for informal work experience. Babysitting or nannying, if it's associated with a letter of recommendation, could justify as that informal work experience, but you can help to determine that as a program.
I see some questions about printing the certification from the PQR. It appears some have been able to print, some are asking why not have the functionality to print. As you know, the TQ application is in a very old application. So from what I understand, there are some people that can print, then there's some people who cannot print. It's probably just easier to email the teacher qualifications unit to obtain your certification, so that we can easily email it to you and then you have it on file. There's a question about explaining how CEUs, PDPs, and credits relate to one another as far as equivalence. We do break that down in our minimum requirements. I'm going to copy and paste it in the chat. It's on pages 23 and 24, what the equivalents are. So I suggest take a look and reading it in detail, what the equivalents and in our approved training institutes that we accept for these CEUs and PDPs.
Let's give a couple more minutes to see if more questions fly in, but I think we've done a decent job, Alicia, of catching those as they come.
All right. Let's see. There's a question about there's challenges on completing a semester course within 6 months of hire. If you review our minimum requirements, those can also be completed through CEUs and PDPs, which may have a shorter time frame rather than a semester course. So we do have the equivalents of CEUs and PDPs to equate to the 3 additional credits needing to be taken within 6 months. There's a question about if you've already sent in an application. We are continuing to process the applications that were submitted. So we will clear our backlog and we will issue certificates for those who have submitted applications prior to the release of these minimum requirements. And the question is, can you go ahead and have the change to the new status now? Caitlin, I believe they can qualify the staff on now if they have the documentation.
Correct.
Yeah, we will still process the application that we have on file as well.
I'm seeing some questions about Strong Start. You all have good intuition. We are looking at that and to think about how we can broaden availability of online coursework through LMS on that platform, recognizing that now CEUs and other PDPs are accepted as part of the equivalencies. Yeah, I just want to reiterate with the table, because I do know, I appreciate that that is confusing some folks. There is a first row that what talks about the existing requirements. So that was what was in EEC regulations. The additional rows beneath that are not intended to stack. Those are options. So depending upon what the qualifications are of your staff, you may adopt one row or a combination or work to kind of piece together what the program at your level would expect in meeting the minimum hiring requirements. I really appreciate these thoughtful questions from folks. And so thank you in advance for helping us to make this policy stronger and to support really effective implementation. There is not an expectation, and I just want to reiterate that directors go back and adjust staff records that have already completed the teacher qualifications process. This policy pertains to programs who are making hires moving forward. So I just want to make sure that that is clear. There's not an expectation that you request additional documentation from candidates or educators that you currently have hired. But this is really a policy moving forward. All right, I think we're at 10:53, so we're almost at the end, and I haven't seen any new questions trickle in the past 2 minutes. So I just want to remind folks that we are recording this webinar, and so Tuesday's webinar was recorded and posted on the engagement portal. This one will be as well. Alicia was very kind in putting the teacher qualifications email address in the chat. So you can continue to reach out to that email box if not all of your questions were answered, but I do believe we did a pretty bang up job of trying to multitask with those on the chat. Additionally, we will have office hours on Tuesdays and Thursdays through the remainder of December. You can register for those on the TQ web, or I'm sorry, on the EEC webpage on the engagement portal. Just want to thank all of you for being so supportive of EEC and really appreciating our intent, which was to meet you where you're at and to make sure that you have the tools and the resources you need to more quickly hire qualified teachers. So thank you in advance for those that were able to provide some constructive feedback and that were able to support our early revision earlier this week.
Bye all.